So, ladies and gentlemen, we are well, already past one, so we have apparently we'll be losing our interpreters, but we'll give some time for questions for the second session. So, if you could be very quick, short in identifying your in saying your questions and identifying yourself. So, Madam here on the right.
Nadine Dominicus. I am a Belgian novel writer and member of an NGO in Guinea-Bissau, Gabon. For Madame Chimandala, I would like to ask you, the farmers in your federation, are they from the formal sector or the informal one?
So we'll continue. We'll pick up a few questions.
Yes, sorry, Professor Linson from the NMNRC. You spoke of building trust. How do you recover lost trust? This will be interesting for the European institutions, for example. And the other question I have is, what do you mean exactly by capacity building? To our mind, it's developing the human being's potential to deal with the complexities of the challenges he or she is faced with in a never-changing world. Well, this requires a fundamental education revolution. So what do you mean by capacity building? So the first question is, how do you overcome lost trust? It's very difficult.
Am I on? Liz Kirk from DFID. It's a very practical question to my colleague from USAID around donor coordination on this area. I think we heard this morning from the GFSP presentation that it's a relatively under-invested area. So practically, what platform or collaboration mechanism do you think would be the most effective from your engagement with donors in this space for those of us wanting to step up and do more on the area? Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Please, on the left there.
Yes, two short comments for Chris. Well, he ended up saying that the standards is a big issue when it comes to food safety. Well, from my experience, the standards are not really the issue. The issue is the enforcement. I don't know if you have had other experiences. Should we keep on making standards when we are not able to enforce the standards which are already there? Yeah, that's the question. And then one to Elizabeth, it's also a comment. You mentioned that there's technology there which is available to do tests and be able to show the quality of food. Of course, that might apply for horticulture. But what I notice in dairy is that the technology is there, as you say, but it's expensive. And also, we need more of rapid technologies because it's also very time-consuming, some of the technologies. And of course, we look at the dairy sector as a sector which is dominated in most African countries by smallholders. And if you do a test, for example, the antibiotic test, it was about $7 2 years ago per sample. Right now, it's about half of that price. Well, what I want to say is that we also still need to develop cheaper methods in addition to more rapid methods. We are not yet there when it comes to technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Isolina, do you want to? Okay, I don't see any more questions. So I will ask each of our speakers to address the questions that are pertinent to them. So I will probably start with Elizabeth. Maybe we can ask you to address a question from the Wageningen University, the technology, and any other comments you might make very briefly.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will. The first question was on the our farmers from the formal sector or from the informal sector? Maybe probably because I didn't get enough time to give a brief of who we are. But our membership are smallholder farmers, and these are members of the National Farmer Organization, and they cross-cut. They're in all sectors. But maybe for a better understanding of the African agriculture system, I don't think we have something like formal when it comes to smallholder farmers. Yeah, it is. These are farmers that are not organized in any way. So what we've been doing for quite some time is to make sure that we aggregate these farmers into production and marketing units, and that's why our membership are cooperatives, farm associations, and commodity associations. So we've tried to to aggregate them into production units based on the different enterprises they are dealing in, and then.
Automatically against food security.
Exactly. It's not
when you aggregate them, you train them, you give them the opportunity to enter in another market. So they are not guilty because we have heard all the time the informal sector as if they were automatically guilty of lack of sanitary control in their production, which is not the case. Your example means that you can structure informal sector, mostly women, and make it food security.
This is what we've been doing for quite some time, but like I mentioned, we've now gone into technologies where we are bringing all the different actors on board, and with our new innovation, which is Ikranare, it's a mobile virtual platform. We are aggregating our farmers for markets, and as a federation, we feel it is our responsibility to make sure that our farmers get quality services. As part of our economic service delivery drive, that's why we are we are aggregating them for both input, output markets, and services. I don't know whether I've really addressed your question. Then on the issue of technologies, I think in one of my recommendations, I mentioned something on pro-farmer technologies that are affordable. So I know, yes, out there are so many technologies, but when it comes to affordability, it is always a challenge, and that is why farmers don't see value, for using these technologies. And like I mentioned, there are no incentives for having safe food on the market. If I can produce my food, my substandard food, and it gives me same monies like someone who is putting in an extra mile to produce safe food, then there's no essence for me to go into more investment in producing safe food. So I think there is no incentive. What really drives the production sector especially in Africa is the incentiveness of production. So unless we promote incentives to drive the production sector in agriculture, we shall continue to see all these issues. Because if I can buy, for example, tomatoes of 1,000 on the streets, and the same tomatoes are being sold, let's say 10,000 in the supermarket, then the two don't really tally. So that's why most consumers always opt to go for cheaper stuff that are on open and informal markets instead of going for quality things that are sold in the supermarkets.
Thank you. Next, Chris.
Thank you very much, moderator. The question that has been directed to me was on the issue of standards, that perhaps maybe we shouldn't, talk a lot about standards now, but focus on enforcement. That was the colleague from the university there, Wangening. And I want to agree that enforcement is important. We must ensure that we enforce the standards that we have, particularly the standards in the market. But I also believe it is important to continue talking about the standards, because in the marketplace, standards also tend to differ. For example, if we look at two big markets for ourselves, for African producers, the EU market here and the US market. We know that for groundnuts, for peanut butter, these two markets have different limits in terms of aflatoxin contamination. The one market tends to be more tolerant than the other one. So it is very important that in terms of our stakeholders in the value chain on the African continent, they are aware of the requirements in each one of the markets. It is crucial in terms of market entry. So the matter of understanding the required standards in all these markets appears to be a priority for all stakeholders in the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, I would ask Kelly to respond to some questions and make comments.
So I'll respond to a couple of questions related to trust and capacity building first. I did not define capacity building in my presentation. I want to just quickly respond to your question. We think about it in terms of knowledge, skills, and abilities. It depends on the context. It does relate to training, and there are metrics that are being developed so that we can assess that. But I'll just leave my response there. I'm happy to talk further. On the trust point, I did raise the topic of trust in the context of how we informally collaborate with private sector partners, but I think it's a fundamental factor in a lot of the work that we do. Obviously, if you're approaching a relationship from the perspective of wanting to sustain it over time, when trust breaks down, there's a choice to make. What does it take to build it back up, or do you step away? So that's a choice. I will say that as we think about how markets expand and supply chains develop, for example, in Africa, we must be, we confront, and we must be ready to confront that breakdown of trust from season to season when things will happen. What I've seen though is that actors are motivated to get back, regroup, collect themselves, figure out what needs to be done to make those relationships work. So I think there are lots of examples that we can pull from there. I also wanted to note briefly on that. You really got me thinking. When I talk to food and beverage company representatives, they often talk about food safety as being part of a pre-competitive space. And I found that really interesting. As we think about food safety and competitiveness and building and expanding the food and beverage industry on the continent of Africa, I think we need to really acknowledge that food safety might in fact be competitive, and that's something that we need to really be cautious of. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there too, because I think trust is going to come into play in that space. The question around donor coordination, what's the most effective platform that came from, I believe, DFID? There are a number of platforms for donor coordination, both in country, but globally. Clearly, everybody's become familiar with the Global Food Safety Platform, our partnership rather, a platform with which USAID has engaged for a while. I think when USAID is thinking, I'm reflecting on this. You mentioned donor coordination. I'd like to expand the opportunity for coordination beyond just donors, because frankly, there are very few of us compared to all of the kinds of actors that we need to see investing in food safety, capacity building. And one of the important characteristics of, for example, the Global Food Safety Partnership that takes us beyond the country level is that it's a chance to bring all stakeholders to the same table. So so USAID sees value in that because it's a space for interacting with private sector partners, with organizations, associations, and of course other governments, both regulators and development entities. So I'd like to just acknowledge that I think the Global Food Safety Partnership is important for us to consider, especially as we aim to address this really urgent need to coordinate investments in support of food safety capacity building in Africa. So I'll just end it there. Thank you.